Dave. David, I'm looking forward to hearing your views today on the trends in transportation. Can you first provide a brief background of yourself?
Yes, Dustin, thank you for this opportunity to speak a little bit about the transportation business and the international trade. David Sanborn. I'm a United States Merchant Marine Academy graduate and a Naval Reserve officer in days gone by, and also was had a third mate's license with the U.S. Merchant Marine. And since I graduated from Kings Point, which is the acronym for the Merchant Marine Academy, I have been involved in the trade from the standpoint of working for shipping lines, working for terminal operators, and also being involved in projects, oil and gas projects. And we've been expatriates in a number of locations. Have worked in Europe a couple of times, in Spain and the Netherlands. We were in Asia several times, working out of Hong Kong, Singapore, and then also most recently I had a 4-year stint in Australia. I've done a lot of business and have worked a lot of my time in Latin America, and that's where I'm presently located in Panama, working on a project down here. But having bounced around, you could tell from various places that we've worked that I've worked that it's been a rather interesting time. I'm 40 years into the business and have had a lot of very good opportunities and a lot of very good interesting places where I've lived with both on my own and with my family.
Thanks. My first question is, what's the state of the ocean shipping industry today?
Well, it's very much in a state of flux, and a lot of this has to do with the economies of the world, the trade. I mean, international trade in terms of cargo and shipments of freight is generally down right now, and this is not such an unusual circumstance because we go through, in our industry, we go through a lot of peaks and valleys, and I've witnessed in the years that I've been in the trade, at least probably 6 or 7 rather major differences or peaks and valleys in which for a number of different reasons, world economies, individual economic situations, circumstances in various countries of the world, and also to do with the supply and demand of vessel space and different things like that. Right now, we're going through a very significant situation where the international trade is down, and as a consequence, the shipping lines are working very, very hard to maintain the utilization at reasonable levels on their vessels and in their various vessel strings. The interesting situation is that hand in hand with this is that we've had a very significant decrease in the cost of fuel. And a lot of these shipping lines have been working very, very hard for the last 5 years to reduce their operating costs. So as a consequence, most of the larger carriers are still doing pretty well financially, but they're not doing as well as they otherwise would be. And part of that is because the trend, of course, is to acquire larger vessels. We're up in the 18 to 20,000 TEU range on a number of the shipping lines and their acquisitions, and we're still dealing with the reality that there are a number of ports in the world, a number of major ports in the world that cannot handle those vessels. But nevertheless, especially in the Asia-Europe trade, where the ports do have that capability, we see the larger vessels plying those trades, and a number of the major ports in the U.S. playing catch-up, especially those on the East Coast of the United States. The West Coast vessels are the West Coast ports, I should say, are in better shape in that respect, in that they have deeper draft and can handle the larger vessels. But because of the trade numbers being down, we're seeing a situation where the shipping lines are taking certain vessels out of service. They're changing their various trade lane coverage, and so they're actually taking space out of their various trade lanes in order to improve upon the utilization of the vessels. So that's another interesting situation. But the overall biggest issue here is that the freight rates are in most trade lanes as low as they have ever been. And this is one of the reasons why many of the shipping lines are somewhat in a significant state of flux in terms of trying to fill their vessels with cargo that's not paying nearly what it normally does, but they're still not doing too badly financially because of these other cost-saving matters that I mentioned before, specifically and more importantly, the cost of fuel.
And can you talk more about consolidation and what needs to be improved there?
Well, there's a couple things. And what I'll do, Dustin, if you don't mind, is to break this into two parts. One is terminal operations, and the other is the actual shipping line. We're seeing more and more shipping lines that are joining forces, merging, forming more VSAs. Most recently, Hapag-Lloyd and CSAV. I'm sorry, CSAV and the German carrier Hapag-Lloyd. I was right the first time. Have merged, and by all accounts, that merger has been very successful in terms of better financials for both of those companies. So we're going to see more of that. We're seeing other rumors of the lines in China being, two of the lines in China being pushed by their government to form, to consolidate and form a different kind of shipping line. And so that's something that is, from the looks of it, is going to go forward. And so what this results in is an interesting situation where the shipper is not overly happy about that process, that the progression of those mergers, because they see this as the possibility for less choice, less competition, which inevitably results in supply and demand issues that, by all intents and purposes, from an economic perspective, should cause the rates to start to rise again. The rates are too low. We can't. The shipping lines cannot sustain competitive and high service operations with the kind of rates that are out there, and so that's going to have to come around. So we're going to see more consolidation. We're going to see more VSAs. We're going to see less shipping lines even attempting to try and run their own lines, their own liner services on their own, and there aren't that many out there anymore anyway. And then the impact that has upon the terminal operations is quite significant from a couple of different perspectives. One, of course, I've already mentioned that the bigger ships still can only call in a relatively small array of ports, and so that creates an operational situation where the economics and the impact of those larger vessels cannot be felt everywhere, simply because the vessels can't get into all of the ports that are in the major trade lanes. Having said that, there are some other dynamics that are going on. For example, the expansion of the Panama Canal, which will result in a canal that will be able to handle vessels that are 3 times the size of what they can today. Sometime in the early part of next year, which is going to enable up to 14,000 TEU vessels to be able to transit the canal, whereas today they can only do around 5,000. That is going to change dramatically the ability of cargo to flow into the East Coast terminals that today can't, because the canal cannot handle that volume. Some of those vessels, some of those larger vessels have moved over to the Suez Canal, and so Panama has lost some of their market share. But that's going to flip back around for a couple of reasons. One is as I say, the enlarged canal. But number two is that Panama Canal folks have been very, very smart, and they're implementing a new tariff, which is essentially going to mean that it'll be cheaper to transit the Panama Canal than it will be to transit the Suez Canal. And so you're going to see a situation where Panama is going to, not only are they going to regain the market share that they have lost over the last couple of years, they're going to improve upon that. And that, in conjunction with the reality that there are a lot of shippers out there who really don't want to go through the west coast of U.S. ports, because they don't want to face the possibility of future problems with with various labor issues, productivity issues, congestion issues, that sort of thing. And you've got the East Coast ports, the East Coast United States ports, that are ready, willing, and able to take those the larger size vessels that will be able to transit the Panama Canal. So in the next year, we're going to see a very significant change in the dynamics of how freight moves, how vessels move, and what routes they want to take.
And my last question is, how should things be done differently in the industry?
Well, I think that there's several things that we need to take a look at. Okay, and that is that one is to look at where the most productive ports are. I mean, you've got a dynamic where, other than comparing the East Coast South America and the West Coast South America, for example, the East Coast of the U.S. and the West Coast of the U.S., the productivity differences between the East Coast and the West Coast are dramatically different. Ships are taking advantage of that productivity and turning the vessels faster. The service capability of many of the vessels that are in the various trade lanes of the world today are not as good as they need to be. Our transit times are not as good as they should be, and our turn times through the ports are not as good as they should be. And so we need to send the vessels to the ports that have the highest degree of productivity. The second thing is that there's going to be a significant amount of cargo that, no matter what, is going to move through the West Coast U.S. ports. That's going to happen, and so as it does today. And so the West Coast ports have got to get themselves into a situation where they are more productive, can turn the vessels faster, and they have some tremendous issues with respect to how the vessels are stowed coming out of Asia. And this is creating a lot of productivity and a lot of congestion issues on the West Coast. So what's got to happen is that the terminals on the West Coast must tie in to the shipping lines, and they need to work out an arrangement, a process, a procedure whereby the way vessels are stowed are coordinated much more closely among the various shipping lines and among the various vessel sharing agreements, together with the terminal operators on the West Coast, to ensure that when a vessel arrives to a particular location, a particular port, let's just use Long Beach as an example, that freight that is coming off is being handled correctly, it's being put in the right locations, and is not having to be drayed all over the port, which is a situation that occurred during and after the ILWU issue with contract issues on the West Coast. So there needs to be a lot more consolidation, a lot more working together of these of the various shipping lines in order to allow that to become a little bit more productive. And we also need to make sure that the capability of the various hubs throughout the world, and this is something that Panama is working very, very hard on right now, with adding port space and new ports and port space and expanding the canal. We need to make sure that we take a close look at the important hubs of the Suez, Panama, and other places to ensure that we give as much attention to that as we can. And I would say here's the most important thing. The most important thing out of all that is that the various governments around the world, this includes governments in Europe, the United States, Asia, need to pay far more attention to the entire process, the entire cargo supply chain process, and be more astute about the importance of ensuring that the infrastructure is there to be able to handle these ports, these vessels, that the infrastructure is there to be able to handle the increased cargo, and that there is a maritime and transportation strategy that is workable for all of the constituents and all the stakeholders. That's probably the number one thing that has to be done, and ensure that that is tied together with the various regulatory bodies, again, in the same three places that I mentioned, and make sure that these regulatory bodies are not trying to punish the shipping lines and the terminal operators, but are trying to understand the issues that they go through so that it's, so that the shippers can be serviced properly, but not everything that the shippers want or say that they need are necessarily good for business.
And thanks, David, for sharing your views today on trends in ocean transportation.
Dustin, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. And these are very trying times for shipping lines, terminal operators, and a lot of other folks. So hopefully we can, in partnership, the subject matter experts in the world can help pull all of this together.
Thank you.